Next, I'm going to be interviewing Nilmini Rubin on a very critical topic and a big picture topic, which is really more national. How do we keep the United States competitive? And a lot of the things that we've been hearing today already are deeply pertinent to this. Nilmini is the Senior Advisor for Global Economic Competitiveness at the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where she leads technology, trade, finance, and energy legislation work. She's had a very eminent career in Washington, even though she's quite young, working in the White House, at the National Security Council, in the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Treasury Department, Federal Reserve Bank, and I think you'll find she has a very strong and interesting perspective on where the U.S. opportunities lie in relation to other countries. So I think I'm now mic'd up properly. Am I? Yes, I am. Nilmini, come join me. We've got a little litter up here on stage. So I know you do have a strong point of view on what's possible. So what's your general thinking about, can the U.S. stay competitive, and what should we be thinking of as a priority nationally as we see countries around the world really redoubling their own focus on, making jobs, building wealth, and selling things to the world?
Well, I absolutely think that the U.S. can remain competitive and grow our competitiveness. We have some of the most amazing natural resources, the most amazing talented people, and we have growing, emerging competitive advantages. I think the previous panel talked a bit about energy, and it's a really powerful transformational change in the U.S., the reduction in energy costs here. It's attracting more foreign companies to manufacture in the United States. It's making our manufacturing more attractive. One example is BMW coming to Washington State, where electricity was 6 times cheaper than they could get in Germany.
Wow.
And building a plant, $100 million plant there. So I think that we have a lot of advantages here in the U.S.
But now, I know you have a very strong perspective on one particular issue, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how we can create some jobs in a way that a lot of people aren't thinking about?
Well, I think that one of the best ways we can create jobs is to increase our exports. We have 317 million people in the United States. There's 7.1 billion people on Earth. That means 95% of the consumers are outside the U.S. And if we keep thinking about growing businesses with just a U.S. focus, we're really missing the people who are there to buy our products. So I firmly believe that focusing on exports and focusing at the beginning of the creation of a company on this wider growth market is really absolutely fundamental. One way that the government's doing that is by encouraging trade deals. So what we did with NAFTA, going forward, a free trade agreement with the US and EU is something that's under negotiation, or a free trade deal more with Asia through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we're trying to push in Washington on trade deals, and we also have different export promotion groups in the US government, things like, they're available on export.gov. We have this alphabet soup of different things that can help companies access markets, because it's really confusing, dealing with all of the regulatory issues in exporting.
Give me some of those statistics that we discussed about how many U.S. companies actually do export. And the scale of the opportunity is really shocking when you lay it out.
So the United States exports 17% of our GDP. That's similar to Rwanda and Tajikistan.
Tajikistan, wow. We're right up there with Tajikistan.
We're right up there. In contrast, Germany, their export to GDP ratio is 52%.
We're 17, they're 52.
Right. And less than 1% of the 30 million companies in the United States export. And 60% of that 1% export to only one country. So we just have a massive potential for increasing our exports.
I think that's a perspective that maybe is not intuitive in Detroit, where the auto industry has had a very global view from the beginning, almost certainly many decades.
Detroit is one of the leading areas. So of all of the areas in the U.S., Detroit region is the fourth largest exporter in the U.S. to other parts of the world.
But
Yay, Detroit.
Okay, don't congratulate yourselves too much here, because I mean, okay, the auto industry we know is rebounding, a lot of strength there, but how does a small company think more intelligently about creating markets outside the U.S.? Which clearly is an opportunity if only 1% of the companies are doing it.
One of the easiest ways to do that is to start out on the internet. So you're initially being accessible to the rest of the world. 58% of US businesses are on the web that even have a website, and less than that 58% have e-commerce enabled websites. So as people think about how to grow their business from the beginning, if they think about being on the net, having e-commerce so people can buy from them easily from around the world, that's a great way to start. The US market, about 78% of Americans have access to the internet. But if you look at the rest of the world, there's a lot more people are going to be coming on, and a lot more people, consumers, will be able to buy our products. India, only 11% of Indians have internet access. And not only will more people have more access to the internet, but they'll have it more ubiquitous ways. They'll have it on their handheld or their tablets or their PCs. And it's a great opportunity.
I mean, there's going to be more and more ways to sell using technology on a global basis. But
Absolutely.
I mean, to turn your statistic around, 42% of American businesses don't have any web presence, you're saying?
Nothing.
Which is kind of amazing. That would be like if 42% of you didn't have a smartphone, which I think is probably not the case. We've heard a lot today about education. You're a competitiveness expert, and you think a lot about these economic issues. How serious do you think the U.S. education and training deficit is as we're trying to prepare people for the economy that's emerging?
I think that the training deficit is really apparent in the structural unemployment numbers. So if you look at who is unemployed, it's not this. It's not, I guess people use the word peanut butter. It's not across the board. It's really certain groups of people that are unemployed for long periods of time. So I think that rather than thinking about these across the board changes on education, which can be helpful, if we're really thinking about unemployment, we need to be thinking about how do we address the people who are lower skilled, who maybe have high school, maybe don't even have high school education, who are the main component of the unemployment, because the number of people with college degrees that are unemployed is very small. There's overall it's 7.3% unemployment in the U.S., 8.8 in this area. In Detroit, it's 8.8, and that means 11.3 million people are unemployed in the United States.
And seeking work. And of course, there's the ones who've forgiven it up, too. Yeah.
And so I think we need to be very focused on how we address the training and skill gap. I was very heartened by, I think, some of the issues that Governor Snyder pointed out by talking about, not just training, but helping people get to work and really thinking holistically about why people are unemployed.
Now, you work in Washington. And I don't think most of us in this room have a very positive view of what Washington is capable of doing at the moment in addressing issues like that. What's your view, even something as basic as what you just said, directing resources more in the areas where unemployment is concentrated and offering kind of creative new services to remediate unemployment? Can we reasonably look to Congress to move forward on some of these kinds of things?
I think that Congress, has a very important role, and
I'm not here to beat you up as a representative of Congress, but I would love to beat up a lot of representatives of Congress, but not you.
Thank you, David. And I think that there is potential, and I think that you're seeing more bipartisanship growing.
You do, really?
Well, I think that the thing, when we agree, no one covers it.
Yeah.
No offense.
Well, you work for another rational Republican like the one that was sitting here before.
Yeah.
So, okay, good. Keep going.
But I think that there are the small bills that get through, or the letters that we'll do to push on the administration to do things that will come up in a bipartisan way. And honestly, like those things never get covered. Our committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, we passed out 2 pieces of legislation recently on export promotion and competitiveness, and I don't think there was a single article about it. And there was a strong bipartisan support, and they saved the taxpayer money. They consolidated some things that were being done in one part of the government, brought them together, created a strategy, and it was like a pin dropping in the forest.
Okay, you said something to me which I don't think is a political comment, but I'm curious for you to explain it a little bit. You said people in Washington are working in an 18th century system to address 21st century challenges. Well, what do you mean by that?
Our system, it was designed to be slow, and it was designed by people who had a very different perspective. And, it was before we even had air travel. So it was people who were expected to be together in one area working towards certain issues. And now, you have members going back to their districts. We're all disconnected in a lot of ways, even though we have more connection with technology, but we're not one little community. And we have a lot of rules that might have made sense when they were created, but they're hard to manage in.
So can we change that?
I think it's hard to change our system, but I think that it's a matter, I think, of educating ourselves and the people who want to change the system on exactly how it works. So instead of just saying Washington is broken, really thinking about, okay, well, how is the system supposed to work, and let's make it work for us.
So you're not somebody who thinks that we have such a dysfunctional government that we can't improve competitiveness coming from Washington.
No,
you're another one of these optimists in a way that's even more counterintuitive than we technology believers.
I guess I look at the rest of the world. We're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and so while we are all very familiar with the dysfunction in our system, there's a lot of dysfunction around the world, and our system has a lot of advantages. And democracy is messy because people we don't agree with have a vote. And it can be very, very painful and difficult to work together in this convoluted system. But at the end of the day, we still have a democracy. And I think that that's something that's a great thing.
Okay, is that somebody over there with a question? No? Yes? Okay, anybody want to make a quick comment or question? Okay. Wait, didn't you just ask one? No.
My name is Frank Barone.
Oh,
I
you're
work and
different.
live in the Washington, D.C. area also.
Good.
I think we sat together on the bus when we came in. A couple of words of advice, having lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for 30-some-odd years. A famous statement, "In God we trust, all others bring data." If you really want to communicate with Washington, D.C., the governor put it forth very, very eloquently. It was restated again here. Please go to Washington, D.C. with no chip on your shoulder, right? No anger in your voice, professionalism in your demeanor, and back up your proposition with a significant amount of data. Recognize you're one of many that bombard them every day. And most importantly, do not come there seeking for revenge for something that happened to you in the past. Plan on something that can be done positively going forward. Go to the subcommittees, solicit effectively the staffers, create papers they can read, focus on points, and provide communications to them. If you do that, Detroit can be very effective. Detroit has a lot of visibility in the DC community right now, a lot of interest, because you're only one of many that are in the same situation. So treat it professionally, don't be angry at it, recognize they're human beings also. They can change, but you have to help them.
Well, it is encouraging that someone like you is engaged in the system, too. Is there another comment or question over there? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Daniel Jeffries with Newmind Group, and I'm fascinated by the export numbers that you shared. I'm curious, the growth of the service sector, how does that play into the export numbers, being that when people think about exports, they mostly think about hard goods?
Well, services are an important part of our exports, and that's something that's really coming to a head, especially as we talk to Europe about the free trade agreement. So financial services is a big part of it. Services, every $100,000 to $250,000 in exports creates a job in the United States, and it depends on what sector. So services, for every dollar in services, it creates a higher number of jobs than even sometimes in some parts of manufacturing. Agriculture is actually the highest number of job creations for services. But as we move more towards services, it's still the same story, that as we think about exporting our services, it will be to our advantage.
Is that one of the biggest opportunities, those services? I mean, should we be thinking not of sending shoes overseas, but of sending software and intellectual property and other service type?
Services are our major component of U.S. trade, and as we think about, what could we possibly sell if we're getting into a free trade agreement with a country like Vietnam, services is obviously a big component of what we can do. So we have, I think Frank mentioned, kind of how to advocate in DC, but there are a lot of groups related to services who come to educate members to make sure that all of the agreements really do cover fairly the services component and don't get forgotten along the way.
And we are about to enter into a free trade agreement with Vietnam if things go right, aren't we?
We're in negotiations with a dozen countries, including Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, Canada, and Mexico for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the round of negotiations is expected to end at the end of this year. Japan just joined, which is very exciting because it's an important market, and it's a market that had a lot of barriers to U.S. goods, so it's an opportunity for us, but it's sort of, there's a risk of it slowing down the negotiations, so everyone's hopeful they will indeed end at the end of this year.
Yeah, there really hasn't been that much movement on free trade in the last few years in the U.S., but do you see that tide shifting, that we could really move towards a lot more openness and more global agreements?
I think that there's a lot of pressure right now in USTR to negotiate more free trade agreements. We have 17 free trade agreements in place now, and with the what's going on with our Asia negotiations and our Europe negotiations, USTR is very stretched. The USTR is our U.S. trade representative, and they negotiate the deals, and it's absolutely critical that we do nail these agreements down because it's the big opening for us.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm just so happy that you could come to join us. You're somebody who I really respect, and I really wish your kind of thinking to prevail in Washington. So
thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Nina.